Welcome to Nunawading City Football Club, a club where Ange Postecoglou spent some time here 13 years ago, and he laid some foundations, and the foundations we're seeing the fruitions of today. We're going to spend some time with some people who have learnt from Ange, who've really paved the way for footballers all over Victoria, learning from what Ange Postecoglou did here in these change rooms out on this pitch many years ago. I'd like to welcome our first panel. Michael Theo is right next to me. First, Michael, obviously you spent a lot of time with Ange in your time at the Brisbane Roar. You won 3 championships under Ange and really transformed the way that football was played in Australia. What was it like playing with Ange Postecoglou at Brisbane?
Yeah, it was amazing, Michael. What I would say is there was plenty of structure. The team knew the way we were going to approach the game, so everyone was on the same page, and just the buy-in that he had from the whole group and the belief once we started getting results and seeing the rewards for our efforts. So, from my perspective, it was amazing to play under Ange. His leadership, his knowledge of the game as well, tactically. He's covered all aspects, and it was a fantastic period for me.
Much like we've seen when Ange was appointed at Celtic, there were those who thought that perhaps he wasn't up to the job, and perhaps there were question marks raised over his appointment and whether he was the right person for the job. How did he convince the players that to buy into his philosophy? Because it was a philosophy that was quite different to anything we'd seen in the A-League. Yeah,
that's correct. And he spent a bit of time previously. I think he came to Brisbane halfway through the previous year, and he sort of started laying the foundations, and then once that season finished, he brought in the players that he wanted to implement his game style and the characters, more importantly, as well. Not just good footballers, but the characters that were going to really drive it. So again, once he had buy-in from the group and we could see we're getting the results, it's just confidence grew, and you could see the football we were playing. And he's one that wants to play a proactive brand with the ball, and he's one that always says, would you rather play in a team that you touch the ball 200-300 times as opposed to running around chasing? And as I said, he had buy-in by the group, and then once we started getting the results, it was just the confidence building, and we went on an unbelievable run that year.
Can you describe the style of football that you played, that was instilled in you at Brisbane, and how long it took for you to adapt to that, because it was quite different to what you'd been used to?
Yeah, most definitely, and especially being a goalkeeper as well. I was used to playing the ball longer up the field and winning the second balls, whereas with Ange, I was playing out from the back, so that was something that I had to get used to quite quickly in terms of my game and my approach. But what made it easier was that everyone was on the same page, so when we played out, we knew we were going to play out, so everyone was showing and you always had options, and that's what I found was the biggest thing for me. Even like when it didn't go well, it wasn't an issue. We had a good pre-season where we could work on it, and the message was we're playing out every single time, so there's no going long. So that's what I'm saying. We had teething issues to be expected, but they pretty tapered off quite quickly, and as I said, we just grew and we got better, and obviously then we could progress to the other side and score plenty of goals as well.
There's a sign in the club room tonight which highlights how Brisbane Roar were respected, and the fans calling it Raw Salona. There was one particular moment where I think we saw the Ange influence, and that was in the grand final, where Brisbane Roar won in very late in the game, and I think you had the ball with literally seconds remaining on the clock, and I could see it going through your mind that you thought maybe I should play the ball long, but you didn't.
You're right. I went back to the principles and our patterns, and our patterns is no, we play out. And you're right. I was sort of arming and ahhing. There's seconds to go. Do I just punt the ball long? But then it's a 50-50, and who knows what happens then? And then I go to throw it, go to kick it again, and luckily for me, I chose the right option, which was play it out, and we ended up working the ball up the field and winning a corner from it and equalising, literally the last second of the game in that grand final. So again, as a player, you know your cues, you know the way you're going to play, and you always fall back on your foundations and the principles, and that was one of our core principles, even though it was the last second of the game or seconds remaining, and that's what helped. I also recall as well, we only lost 1 game that season, and it was here in Melbourne. We lost 3-0 to Melbourne Victory, and we had a couple of issues playing out from the back. We conceded a couple of goals, and it was 3-0, and I thought, okay, it'll be interesting to see Ange just take on it now. We lost our first game of the season. I think it was round 5 or 6 from memory, and to his credit, he said, no, I'll wear it. We're going to continue to play out. So you can imagine it, from a player's perspective, like the belief he instilled in you. I was like, oh, wow, fantastic, we're going to play. And next game, we again played out from the back, and that was the only game we lost the whole season.
What sort of communicator is Ange in the dressing room?
Yeah, look, my experience with Ange, he doesn't say much. Obviously, if there's an issue, he'll pull you to the side, but you respect him, he's the coach, he has to make tough decisions. It's literally in the morning, you greet him and you go about your business. If there's been times as well where he's pulled me aside and said, you've gone long a few extra times, which I didn't like in the game. So again, as I say, if he's got an issue, he'll pull you aside. But yeah, in terms of buying and his leadership and just getting you up for games, amazing, second to none.
We've got a few other panellists here who I'm sure would love to share some stories as well. Steve Brimmer's here with us, and you spent some time here as a coach, one of the early coaches here, and Ange was one of the foundation coaches and set up the program here. So tell us a little bit about how that all came about and your involvement and work with Ange.
So my involvement came through my son Jake, obviously being at the club. Went down actually to one of his. He was not even coaching A-League back then. He was trying to get a junior, I suppose, program together, and Jake went down to that. And once I saw what he was trying to do, that was it. I got Jake involved. We're at Doncaster then at one stage. Then we all came to Nunawading, and his philosophy was the same as obviously was installed here at Nunawading, to play out from the back under no matter what circumstances. You had to play the ball out from the back, as Theo said in regards to keeper, playing it out. And that's where I think, even with Jake, to this day, is having all that playing into tight areas and getting the ball and making sure you use the philosophy that Ange installed in our training sessions. Your first touch, your lateral touches, awareness under pressure all the time is where it was just a different philosophy than I'd been coached before. It was mainly get it up the lines, knock it long, and the strongest kid would win. But we played under pressure all the time. We might have lost and didn't let that scoreline deter what we were trying to achieve.
And how do you think it helped Jake in his development? You touched on it a little bit, but obviously at a young age, he was identified by Liverpool and spent some time over there, which
I got no doubt it was through the program. Like you say, playing in those tight areas and beginning to get out of it. You look back at a lot of people that played against Jake and they wouldn't know which way he was going. And that was because of the tight awareness and the space of where to get out and in. And and to this day, without that philosophy, I don't think he'd be where he is today.
So what would your advice be to other parents? You were a parent, obviously, and a coach, but in terms of thinking about how they learn their football, not necessarily saying that they have to come to a club like Nunawading, but in terms of philosophy, what works, do you think?
Just make sure that you're always touching the ball. The ball's mainly that you've got to be, like you say, playing with the ball. No, in regards to running and things just making sure the touch is there all the time. Constant touching with the ball, working with it with the drill. Is always make sure you're touching with the ball. And don't get caught up in regards to results. It's all about individual development at a young age.
Yeah. We'll come back to you and to Michael, but Steve Voursoukis, thanks for joining us. Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
not many do, but anyway, you did quite well.
An interesting story, because you're the senior coach here at Nunawading now, and you've had some boys come through from 13 years ago, and you've seen that development. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was a bit of a latecomer here at the Nunawading Football Club, but I was intrigued with the program. That's what sort of caught my eye. I think it was 2012, and wanted to get involved a little bit more with junior football, because I was coaching senior football before that, and thought I'd take a step back now, and I took a different path, and I was glad I did actually. I've learned a fair bit through this football club. Sort of helped me with my DNA and where I wanted to be as a football coach, as a senior coach. So I've taken a lot out of that philosophy, and I'm enjoying coaching the senior team at the moment, which sees probably about, I think we've got a third of the squad is made up of Nunawading juniors that have played here and done their program from a young age. So it's good. You do see improvement in footballers. Every club has their philosophy. Every club's a little bit different, but it certainly does play a big part in improving that individual and their football. So yeah, it's good.
You had the honour or pressure of coaching Ange's son as well for a few years. Tell us what that was like.
Yeah, the pressure. Yeah, no, it was. Look, to be honest, it was probably. I looked at it as one of the greatest experiences, because we had the greatest football brain. The greatest resource you can have in Australian football. Watching our games. Sometimes you notice some of the individuals on the ground might, instead of playing for the coach, they were playing for the Australian national coach at the time, so, that got a little bit out of hand at times. But, having that resource, and he was always accommodating, if you wanted to get some feedback on some of the performances, you can approach him and, he'd give you some feedback. But he was, Ange was like any other parent. He'd sit back and watch his son play and enjoy the game, so there was no added pressure. It was good. Actually, James, his son, was a challenge in himself. He had his dad's attributes. He was ruthless, and he was a winner. He hated losing, so you had to keep him tamed a little bit at times. So he was good. Yeah.
Steve touched on it a little bit earlier. What do you do as a coach when the results aren't going your way? Because there are times when you're not winning games, but you're sticking to the philosophy and having to try to instill belief in the players about learning that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we were 1-3 early on in the year this year, and we were coming up against Preston. So I think everyone had us penciled down for 1-4. So. You just have to keep pushing the belief. We're going to get back doing what we believe in and what we're doing well. We practice it every session. So don't stop believing. You got to, and that's the coach's responsibility to instill that belief as well. The players, to their credit, haven't stopped believing, and we came out and I think we won 3-1 that day against Preston. We played our football, played it really well, and. The belief starts to grow. When you start getting the results, everybody's confidence grows. But it's when you're down and out and you have to work your way through that. That's where the growth comes from and the belief. So, just never give up with what stick to your guns.
What wise words did Ange impart on you when you were coaching his son in particular? Anything?
Not much. I did get a handshake once. I did get a handshake once for. Doing a good job. He was doing well. Actually, he was probably our barometer too. He was almost leading goal scorer in the league in the under-18s at that time. He was having a lot of fun with it. I'll tell you what, he was well coached off the park because he knew the runs. He knew how to get into position. So didn't have to do too much in regards to coaching his football. And he wasn't the most technical footballer, but he was very smart in the way he played. He used his strengths. He was able to score goals, unlike his dad. But he wasn't ruthless like his dad, mate. I told you, he just didn't like losing. So, yeah, didn't have to say too much.
Yeah, and what about from your point of view? Have you had a lot to do with Ange, especially in the earlier years when you were coaching here as well?
Yeah, well, he had a few different sessions here, guiding us in the right ways to coach the young lads and that. But yeah, he was a character, like you say. I always felt nervous actually him watching you. Such a big. Personality and everything, but I remember there was one thing. We were watching one game and there was this one lad and he was probably the one of the worst players on the pitch, we thought, and Ange would say you're only as good as your worst player, and the coach has got to take the responsibility for it, and that's true. You've got to make that better, improve that player.
Yeah, Michael, from your point of view, we've heard famous stories over the years about players trying to approach Ange and trying to have a chat to Ange, and sometimes that can be difficult, right?
Very true.
Can you share any experiences from your time at Raw? Not with you in particular, but any players that got caught out by that?
Oh, look, as I mentioned earlier, like that year that he spent, half a year he spent earlier on, it was sort of, okay, this is the way we're going to approach it, and you find out quite quickly who buys in and who doesn't, and there's a bit of a clear out at the club prior to that. So when he, the following year, when he brought in the players that he wanted to, it was all pretty much smooth sailing. But in saying that, you're there to do a job, and he's the boss at the end of the day, and he has to make tough decisions. So in terms of a player coach, there's that respect, but it's not like you're friends. It's very different in that regard. I knew Ange personally as well, but it was literally handshake in the morning, how you going, Ange? And it was business as usual. So that's how we approached it, and that's the way you want as a professional. You just want to know that you're heading in the right direction, and if he ever wanted to, if he wasn't happy with anything, he would pull you aside and have a frank discussion. But I can even remember the 36-game undefeated streak we went on. Every week Ange would come in with a new team talk, and you'd be ready to run through a brick wall. You're like, wow, how does he come up with these team talks? So, and it's not just the 11 that are playing or the 14 and 15th, it's the whole squad. He has buy-in by everyone, and that's what I mean. He gets you going on a journey, and it's a collective, and there's a lot of unknowns there, but that's the exciting bit about it. There's no limitation, there's no ceiling. It's just, can we improve on a daily basis? And that's what he gets out of his teams, and that's what he's really, really good at doing.
Were those team talks motivational team talks, tactical team talks, or a bit of both?
Yeah, it's a weird one, because I found personally, as being a professional footballer for 18 years, I found coaches either tactically are very good or they're man management. So there's not both. Whereas with Ange, tactically he was amazing, and his man management was great as well. So yeah, for me, it's the best by far that I've been coached under. Just as I say, the respect that he has, the buy-in. There's obviously a certain playing style that we're going to play to, and everyone's on that page, and plan Bs do plan A better. Like, we don't deviate from the game plan. So yeah, he was an amazing coach. As I said, the whole group loved working under him. I think Brisbane at the time transformed football, how it was played here in Australia. Just the football we played, it really was a pleasure. And obviously, being the goalkeeper, I probably had the best view in the house. So I was pretty privileged to seeing some amazing goals, some great team goals.
You touched on when you first arrived at the club and having to make some decisions about some senior players. If my memory serves me correctly, there was Charlie Miller and Craig Moore, who were very established, very senior footballers there with big personalities and big egos. How did Ange manage that?
Yeah, look, I wasn't there at the time, but as you mentioned, they are big characters. But as I said, Ange would have come in and was ingraining his style of play. This is how we're going to approach it, and if you're not going to buy into it, that's fine, but you're not going to be part of the club moving forward. So a lot of those players dropped off on their own accord. So that's how we sort of handled that situation. It's either we're heading in this direction. If you want to be a part of it, great. If you don't, there's plenty of other clubs out there.
They opted out.
They opted out, exactly. But no, he's ruthless and he's firm in that regard. But as I said, he's got the respect from everyone. Yes.
But Craig Moore ended up back at the club after a few years too, didn't he?
Correct. And he even did some work with Ange in the Socceroo setup as well. So there's definitely respect there, and there's no hard feelings to say. It's just he didn't want to be part of that particular journey. That's all.
Thanks for joining us, gents, and thanks for sharing some of your stories. And great to hear some of the great stories we've had. So we'll be back with plenty more in our next segment.
Welcome to Nunawading City Football Club. Today we're going to be joined by some people who've spent a lot of time over the years with Ange Postecoglou and share some of their stories, what they've learnt, and explain to us what this owl is in front of us. One man who could probably do that for us is Greg Mangonis. Greg, can you start us off with this owl? What's he doing here?
Well, Michael, interesting story about the owl. Give you a little bit of background information, some insight. Ange once said to me, it's not what you do when I'm here, it's what you do when I'm not here. So I guess the owl sees everything when Ange is here or he's not here.
And it has pride of place in the club rooms, does it?
Very much so. It keeps everyone in line, Michael.
Now, Ange, you go back a long way. Greg, with Ange. As far back as 2003, when Ange was in charge of the Australian youth team. Tell us a little bit about your time in 2003 with him there.
Yes, definitely, Michael. I recall at the time I was appointed the gear steward for the Australian youth team, and I first got a taste of Ange. I won't say I met Ange at the time. I got a taste of Ange because we were in preparation for the World Youth Cup, and we were in camp for about 2 weeks. And I turned to the team manager at the time, Andrew Theoclitos, and I said, Andrew, is everything okay between me and Ange? Because we've been in camp for 2 weeks and he hasn't even said hello. Andrew turns around and said, "Greg, that's a good thing," he said, "but get really worried if Ange asked to speak to you." So that was my first taste of Ange.
Obviously, it was a time where he was still learning his trade as a coach. He had some great success with the Australian youth team. What did you see as a young coach?
What I saw at the time was he was very meticulous. He had huge authority in the environment, but he was a coach of little words. So what I mean by that is everything would be efficient. He wanted full professionalism. But one thing that really stood out was the passion, Michael. And I recall at the time we'd beaten Brazil 3-2 in their group stage, and we qualified for the knockout rounds. And we were playing UAE in front of 20,000 home fans. And at around the 80th minute, we copped a soft goal, and there's 20,000 people celebrating, but all I can hear on my right side was someone screaming. So I've glanced, and it was Ange in an emotional outburst, which I likened to someone mourning at the time. And after that loss, Ange went missing for 48 hours until it was time to depart the UAE. So that's how passionate Ange was at the time.
Great story. Nick is also on the panel with us as well, Nick Dimitrakis. Now, Nick, legend has it that you were responsible for the phrase up on the wall here, Voursoukis, is that right?
Yeah, definitely. There was, the philosophies were similar at the time, and it sort of rhymed well, Voursoukis. Yeah. So we got a bunch of the children at the time, got them a paintbrush and banner, and came up with "Thank you, Ange, for Voursoukis." It followed us pretty much everywhere on the road. It even got to Barcelona on a beach one day.
Tell us a little bit about this mural, which it strikes you when you come into this club at Nunawading, how this came about and the meaning of what's behind us.
Yeah, the three personalities, Cruyff, Pep and Ange, all share similar philosophies. Their personalities, they're innovators, they're ahead of the game all the time. They always want to evolve the game. So they've got those obvious similarities, but the main reason Ange got put up on this wall was I was having a discussion during the game just out there, and he was in a jovial mood. We were watching the game, and it was just when he signed for the City group. And whenever you asked the question to Ange, it always had to be calculated because of his aura about him. And in this particular moment, I thought, okay, Ange, congratulations. You're part of the City group now. You're going to go and meet your mentor, Pep Guardiola. And from jovial, he turned around and got really stern with me, and he said, "Nick, Pep is a great coach, but Pep is Pep and Ange is Ange." So I walked away, I was a little bit down, came home, and I thought, gee, this man has got a vision of becoming better than Pep. I got my son's friend that was a graffiti artist on the streets. I called him up. I said, "Listen, I want you to come to the club and I want you to paint this picture with the intentions one day Ange will be as great as those other two coaches." And as we're seeing 5 years later, the mural's becoming alive. There have been cases where seniors have been coaching, training on the field, and they reckon the eyes turn around and the mouth moves. There have been sightings. The mural is actually coming alive. We got a lot of flack at the beginning because the success wasn't there with the other two. Those people are pretty quiet at the moment.
Yeah, and the story has a long way to play out.
Correct.
Tim Dakis is also on the panel. Tim, you've done some great work with a junior program here and spent a lot of time with Ange implementing that philosophy. Tell us a little bit about your work at the club and how that's translated with the juniors here.
Yeah, look, thank you, Michael.
Firstly, I'm very honoured to be part of this presentation. I'm very, very honoured to be part of an unbelievable team of coaches. And Greg mentors me and our coaches. And even having Steve Brimmer as part of our team as well, we've been here now for over a decade. And in saying that, the methodology of the program highlights a lot of the consistency that we get from the players learning, which then slowly flows into our junior NPL program. Part of that program is very heavily focused on being on the ball. I mean, to the point where every individual would be on the ball close to 1,000 to 1,200 touches a session. And there was a lot of components in the program that were introduced that the program evolved with. So, for example, there's no queuing for kids, right? So every child was on the ball, every child was active, every child was thinking and making decisions and looking for where the spaces are, where the opponents were and where their teammates were. So there was links of training that were technical, that the child was constantly non-stop making decisions to produce the best possible ranking answer. So as the program evolved, we would often get feedback from Ange, and we'd add some things to it. You know, the lateral touch was, we introduced that very, very early into the program. Training from twice a week to 3 times a week, we introduced it extremely early into the program. So that means more repetition, more time on the ball, more engagement from the players. And even in saying that, I would learn every session, I would get something out of it more. But I'll never forget, like Nick spoke and Greg spoke, Ange had this passion that just basically spread throughout the club. So my mantra is, if I can be passionate towards the kids and the kids can see and believe in the program, then their journey, they're on a really, really positive journey. Where that takes them, obviously, is their ambition, their sacrifice and beyond. But it's a program that has produced and continues to produce wonderful people and very, very solid footballers.
Tell us a little bit about Greg, Ange's demeanour in a dressing room. Take us back to 2003 in the World Youth Cup and that game against the Czech Republic.
Wow, yeah, my recollection at the time, I think it was the second group game, and we were 1-0 down at half time. And interestingly enough, there was one player at the time who was mouthing off, and he was quite loud. And all of a sudden, Ange comes through the dressing room door, and he shouts, "If I were you, I'd shut up right now, because between you and your direct opponent, there's only one playing well, and it ain't you." Yeah. From there on, you could hear a pin drop. From there on, and it worked, because I think we equalised in the second half, and we got a positive result through that game as well.
And did that player's performance improve in the second half, or did he take him off?
Well, that's an interesting point, because from recollection, I think he either took him off or he played a little bit of that second half and then he was taken off.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. What about his attention to detail? And you had an experience about this specifically at that same World Cup.
I've got a lot of those examples. What's probably the most relevant? I'll think of 2 at the time. One was getting on the team bus to go to training. And here I am casually going through the team door 5 minutes before departure time. I sit down, all's good, I'm thinking. A minute later, team manager comes up to me. He says, "Don't do that again." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Don't be late." I said, "I'm not late, it's 5 minutes before departure time." He goes, "Mate, you're late. Ange's been in the bus waiting for you." So I got a good taste of those expectations. And another one was being the gear steward, we would go to games a couple of hours before kickoff and set up the whole room. And I always recall the team manager making sure, Greg, do not forget any of Ange's needs. And what he meant by that is we had to have different types of coffee set up for him, laid out, different type of chewing gum, his suit in the right place. So that's the level of detail that we're talking about, Michael, at that level.
What are your lasting impressions of your time spent with Ange, Nick? And obviously there's still more to come, but from what you've learned so far.
I remember when he first arrived, one of my first questions were, Ange, how do we improve the traits of the next generation of footballers? And we're talking 13 years ago. Juniors weren't even recognised too much back then. They were put somewhere and no one really cared about them. His reply was, Nick, we need to produce more lateral movers. Lateral movers, wow. We got to improve more intelligent footballers. Intelligent footballers, wow. We need to get players that have got 360 vision, I guess similar to the owl, I guess. We need a lot more repetition of passing and touch. I go, Ange, are you born with all these traits, or can we coach these traits? And of course the answer was definitely coach these traits.
Yeah. And you talk about a good training session, and I think Tim touched on it earlier, but what do you see as a good training session?
Yes, so Ange would turn up and he would choose any player on the field. And if that player gets a lot of touches, that training session's a really good training session. If that player doesn't get many touches, well, that session's not a good session at all. And we had coaches come in and saying, gee, I found this YouTube session from Europe, and was really proud of showing it to the children. But in Ange's mind, if he didn't have many touches, it was not a good session. To see improvement in the players over a period of time, Ange would come back, he would choose the weakest player, and then come back 3-4 months later. If that player's improved, we know that everyone's improved. So that was one way of gauging if the program was doing its role.
What about junior development, just more broadly, and shooting for junior development? What does this club's philosophy look like from that point of view?
If you're going to do a shooting drill, it needs to be designed where there's a lot of touches and there's no standing around. So you design the shooting, but it's continuous. We don't want to have a line and one guy has a shot, the other one waits for 2 minutes and has a shot, and then the next one waits 2 minutes and has a shot. We won't, that's not acceptable. Wait time is not acceptable at junior development. Yeah.
Greg, I suppose we're talking a lot about junior development and player development, but Ange over the years has also mentored coaches, and we've seen a lot of coaches now learn from Ange and learn from other Australian coaches, and the success of other Australian coaches overseas is apparent now. We've got Kevin Muscat obviously doing really well in Japan, and there are others who are making that path. What has Ange sort of taught you as a coach and mentor?
Well, funnily enough, after that World Cup, it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years later that, ironically, I got sacked as a senior coach. And I was rather despondent at the time. But, like Ange says, every disadvantage has an advantage. And in my search for a new coaching position, I looked up the Victorian Football Association website. And funnily enough, it had Ange's new technical program being advertised, and it was calling out for new coaches. So that was about 2007. I applied and I was successful in becoming one of his assistant coaches. For the next 6 months, I can categorically say that Ange changed my whole world in terms of the way I saw football and its needs in terms of developing juniors. And I recall him telling me at the time, Greg, you've got 2 choices here. You can go back to coaching senior football, or you can stay here with me and learn everything there is to do with junior development. Thankfully, I chose the latter, and I'll be forever indebted to Ange and what he taught me and continues to teach me when I even watch Celtic now. I see Ange as a figure that's bigger than life, yeah, and I don't just say that lightly. In my eyes, he's probably, if not one of the best, he's surely one of the top 5 best managers in the world. It's just that unfortunately, he was, as he keeps saying, he was born in Australia, and it's taking a lot longer for people to realise his potential. But I think it's just a matter of time because, like Ange says, he doesn't stop. Celtic won't stop, and unless he gets success in Europe, he won't be content.
I was lucky enough to be there when they won the title, and when he said, making his speech, "We never stop," it's exactly what you've just reflected. Where do you see him in the next few years? Obviously, he's got a job to do at Celtic, and it's a big year for him. But no doubt there are, down the track, as we've learnt with Ange, more ambitions.
Look, the one thing I've learnt about Ange is trying never to anticipate what he's going to do next, yeah? Because like the mural, these personalities, they're sort of in their own sort of sphere in life. They're front runners, they're innovators, they're visionaries. And the funny thing is, as people start to try and copy their success, they're already moving ahead of time and improving what they're doing to stay ahead of the pack. So I'm not here to judge what he's going to do next. All I'm going to say is trying to provide you an insight into the way he thinks. He once told me, and I'll never forget it, he says, limits and obstacles are the words of the defeated. For us, there's only possibilities. And that stays in my head every day. Yeah. Just, it's what he's about and it's what he's like.
Very powerful. Tim, you had, a lot of experiences and learnt a fair bit. There's some hard lessons along the way. Tell us about one that particularly sticks in your mind one day when you were coaching.
Yeah, definitely. So we're out on the grounds and we were delivering a practice at the time, and Ange was observing, and I said to Ange, everything starts and ends with a game. And then Ange just looked at me very sternly and he cuts me off. And I thought, oh no, I'm in big trouble here. And so he raised his voice and he said, no mate. He said, for juniors, everything starts and ends with a ball. And I'll never forget that too. Because I really understood that, you know what, the ball has information by the way in which it moves. And obviously that's coming from the child or the player, the young player, attributing to that movement. So it is the ball. So it's pretty interesting.
We've all been on the other end of that death stare from Ange Postecoglou. It's uncomfortable at times, but we all respect what he's done in the game. Now, Nick, tell us a bit about this club and the influence Ange has had. Obviously, when you walk into the club, his presence is here on the wall. But how much do kids of 8, 9, 10 years old understand? And is that part of your education to sort of highlight the journey that Ange has been on and what they can learn from that?
You can measure success in various ways. In the last 5 years, we've had 3 development players represent Australia at under 17 level. That's a huge achievement for a little club that started with 15 kids, and we're talking all of Australia. All 3 scored at international level. So for minimal shooting practice, or the perception of minimal shooting practice, that's not bad. One got signed by Liverpool and got best player in the A-League last season. Jake Brimmer. So there's other ways of measuring success. We have a large number of players in our senior squad that started as 12, 13-year-olds that are now representing our seniors. So as a parent, that's a success. Not many other clubs can actually talk about that situation. if Ange was to walk back into this environment after 5-6 years, he would see nothing's changed. The philosophy is consistent from our mini roos right through to our seniors, and that would be something he'd be proud of.
Yeah.
Nothing deviates. We didn't have a president for a period of time. Actually, the owl was the president.
The owl's still here.
and the reason being, we didn't want interference between the board and the coaches, and that's kept our philosophy stronger. Helped keep our philosophy strong along the way.
Yeah. Greg, from your point of view, the legacy that not that Ange has left, but is leaving on this game, how do you sum that up?
In terms of legacy, I think wherever Ange has been, he's left a legacy, both in football terms and the way he conducts himself and the way he actually departs the environment. He always leaves something there for people to move on. We're seeing that in Japan right now with Kevin Muscat and the continued success of that club. But in terms of ultimately, the legacy that Ange leaves is the belief system that he instills in individuals, and what that means to the environment is so important. And when he goes to the press and he continually gets asked and questioned about whether he's going to change his philosophy or playing style just because he's playing in the Europa League against Bayer Leverkusen, and people actually just don't listen to the fact that he doesn't change because that's what he believes in and that's what he instills in the dressing room. And effectively though, and look how honest he is, he says, if you want me to change, well then I'm no good for this environment because I'm not good at anything else. Because when I went to the library, I only went to one section and I wanted to master that section's, the books in that section. And that's where Ange is at. So the legacy he leaves is, believe and lead the environment, regardless of the obstacles that may surface.
Yeah. Tim, from your point of view, you talk about this 1,000 touches a session. Are you seeing other clubs adapt that type of model in Victoria, in Australia? It's a unique model, but surely others are learning from it as well.
Look, I hope so, and we're open to sharing and learning, because we're all seeking to support a junior person to enjoy the game at maximum level, and especially at such a young age, the highest priority is for that individual to get as much ball time as possible. And in saying that, we welcome clubs to share ideas, and I hope that does evolve. I mean, I see it in bits and pieces, but we don't see a lot of consistency. And I wish, with time and us, being open to one another, we can actually build a better place.
I think one of the frustrations Ange had, and ultimately why he left the Socceroos role, Nick, was that he was feeling like he was constantly fighting a battle for our game, not just for his team, but for our game in this country. And when you see him in the environment in Scotland, he's happy because it is a football environment. And do you think we've still got a long way to go here in Australia to embed? I know the answer to the question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, though, in terms of embedding the football culture in this country. What can we do to improve that?
You're right, Michael. 13 years ago, when we began playing out at the back, I lost friends. I literally lost some close friends. Yeah. They thought I was mad, or we were all mad. Yeah. Guys were going in, goalkeepers couldn't kick to the left back, and the ball was going back in. So it was very challenging, and it has been challenging throughout the last 13 years. It's got a lot better, possibly because of the success of Ange. So we need more successful coaches overseas. But we are moving forward. We are definitely moving forward. We've definitely moved forward from 13 years ago. And it gets back to the beliefs and having a direction. Yeah, if everyone knows and everyone's following the same direction, it makes it easier for everybody else. So it starts at the mini-roo level. Everyone needs to be educated. Everyone needs to follow the program, and 5, 6, 7 years later, you'll see the results as we've seen at this club. Yeah.
I'd love your perspective on that as well, Greg, because you've been involved in the game for a long time, just like everyone around this table. What do we need to do in this country to instill that philosophy, that belief, that culture in our game? Because we have a lot of competing factors here.
Michael, I actually asked Ange, because when you speak to Ange, the answer's easy. I said to Ange, why is it so hard that we don't introduce at least one Ange Postecoglou Centre in every state of Australia? And then we get the best players under that program. And his response to me at the time was, Greg, because when I turn my back and I'm not there, everyone goes back to the old ways. So that was so frustrating hearing that from Ange, because effectively the answer's there, but unfortunately the investment or the backing or the belief again is not. And unfortunately we find ourselves in Australia where we introduced the national curriculum, and then maybe a decade later there's revisions to that curriculum, so we're sort of running blind at the moment. Unfortunately.
Let's finish on a positive note. I'll start with you, Tim. The greatest thing that you've seen and learnt over the years, and your hopes for the game here.
Yeah, the biggest joy or elation for me is watching our young kids grow up and follow their dreams and their journeys. And I'm pretty proud individually and collectively that we're actually being able to dent or support them in their growth. That's the biggest thing for me. It's priceless, actually.
Greg, on the positive side, there are plenty of positives.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back. I think one moment that really stands out was when Ange won the championship with the Brisbane Roar. I think his first one, and we were at the after party, and I went and shaked Ange's hand.
I was there at the pub.
Correct.
I was introducing all the players.
Correct. Yeah. At the pub, correct. Yeah. And Ange looked at me in the eye, and he said, "Believe, Greg."
Yeah. And you did. And you still are believing.
I still are believing, correct.
Nick?
Never limit yourself.
Yeah.
Always aspire to the best of your ability. I learned that with the Muriel.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of those insights, gents, and we've learnt a lot, and I'm sure we'll continue to learn a lot from what you're doing here at this football club and what Ange continues to do overseas. Excellent. The story's not over. Thanks for joining us.